Hi everyone, I'm Raga D'Silva, your host for Older Queer Voices. Today's guest has spent more than 4 decades at the heart of LGBTQ plus activism, culture, and HIV advocacy. From protesting against Section 28 and being part of the direct action group Outrage, to leading major HIV organizations and helping shape strategies to end new HIV transmissions, he has witnessed and influenced some of the most significant moments in our community's history. He has challenged stigma, championed visibility, and remained a powerful voice for people living with HIV. It is a pleasure to welcome Matthew Hodson for Older Queer Voices.
Hello.
Matthew, look at your smile.
Oh no! As I was saying to you earlier, I can't see it at all.
See, Matthew can't see today, which is fine. Matthew, I can see you. I'm sure the viewers on YouTube will see you, and those listening, please note that this is a very good-looking man sitting right in front of me.
Thank you very much.
So,
Something I really struggle with is taking compliments, but I'm trying to learn how to do it with grace. So if someone says something like that, I just can go, "Thank you."
oh, that's so nice. It is so important, though, but that's a very important point. And maybe we can just kind of cover that as well when we had this conversation, because I think it is a lot to do with our community and what we've been through. So, Matthew, before we start talking about activism and HIV, I want to know who this Matthew Hodson is. Where did your journey start?
Oh gosh. Um, well, I mean, kind of one of the things that I sometimes say is because I was born in 1967, just 12 days after homosexuality was partially decriminalized. So I like to think that I've actually been here for the whole journey of kind of LGBTQ plus legal reform in the UK. Yeah, I don't think they changed the law. I don't think, obviously it's just a coincidence, but I like
It
to
was
think
you. It
that they
was you.
said
It was you.
we need to make this country ready because Matthew's on his way. Um,
It was you. You are responsible for this.
Well,
See?
yeah, I think if I had been responsible, I hope that I would have done a better job of it because, as we all know, homosexuality was only partially decriminalized in 1967. And in fact, the number of arrests of people for homosexual activity increased after the partial decriminalization. So
Sure.
it's not a law which I think we recognize that it was a stepping stone as part of our progress, but actually it didn't necessarily make the lives of LGBTQ plus people better in the short term.
So, Matthew, tell us a little bit more about your early life. That little
Um,
Matthew, the young Matthew.
Little Matthew was desperately precocious. Yeah. So I was born in London, and I've lived in London pretty much all of my life. Um, by the time I was 15, I think I realized that I was gay, and so yeah, at the age of 15, I felt like I felt the burden of my gay virginity. And I decided to relieve myself of that burden. And I went to the nightclub Heaven at the age of 15. Uh, I had found out about it from Time Out, the Time Out Guide to London, which had a tiny little gay section. And I just read this listings and I had no understanding of it at all because it said cruisy, and I thought that meant men dressed as sailors. Um, it said full of clones. I thought that was people who looked like David Bowie. So I was kind of all of which was good as far as I was concerned. It said it opened at 10, so like at 9:55, I was standing outside that club waiting to be let in and terrified that anyone from my school would see me, although what anyone from my school would be doing in the middle of Charing Cross at 5 to 10 on an evening, I don't know.
Matthew, I'm going to interrupt you here. I'm going to interrupt you because I'm really curious about this. We're just going to go back again. 15 years old, were you allowed to go into these clubs at that age?
No, oh no, it's desperately illegal. I mean,
Okay.
the age of consent for gay men at that time was 21, so I was a whole 6 years too young, and you weren't allowed to go in. I think you were, even though the age of consent was 21, I think you actually were allowed to go into a gay club, at 18. But yeah, I was still way too young for that,
So,
and
so
I
did they
want
not ask for IDs or anything those days?
no. No, no one cared really. I mean,
Wow.
I was, yeah. It,
And
it's a weird thing because I do look back on it now. I mean, if you know, I kind of think of my kind of nephews. Like I've got a nephew who's 15, and I'm like, I couldn't bear to think that he would be up to anything like I was.
sure.
And I do, you know, it's so I met a guy when I was there. He was an American guy. He was over on business. We went back to his hotel room, Sheraton Park Tower, and we had sex. And like now, as a man approaching 60, and I'm thinking about this 32-year-old man having sex with a 15-year-old boy, and it does make me feel a bit queasy. But I also have to acknowledge that I absolutely chose that I would have been devastated if I hadn't picked up. But also, I think it does speak of the time that we lived in then, because we didn't have the internet, we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have gay youth support groups or anything like that, and we had no way of finding or connecting to other gay people. So I was there, 15 years old, and I knew I was gay, and how could I connect? How could I find my community? And the only way I could find my community was by going to a club. You know, so that was the only option I had. And I don't look back on it and feel comfortable with some of it. But on the other hand, it's like, well, what else was there for me at that time? And I think that's kind of the important thing is I really hope that 15-year-old kid now will have a whole array of support resources available to them, that they will be able to meet other gay kids their own age and, you know, be able to kind of find the right time to make that very adult decision.
Yeah, this is so revealing, Matthew. This is revealing of our time because I'm very close to your age as well. And things that we did, not whether we were queer or not, we just did things. We were independent. Somehow we managed to tell our parents. I don't know whether you had to lie or you had to make up a story, whatever words we use, and you somehow ended up going to places which you wouldn't have we didn't think of going. And I'm still stuck in that 15-year-old boy. I just want to know, Matthew, what did you tell your parents? Where were you going? And then you said that you knew you were gay. In 1967, that's early 70s, we're talking, or no, late 70s, right? We're talking about
No,
that
it
time.
would be
80s.
it would be 1983. This would have been.
Yeah, so
I was almost
1983.
16. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So 1983, how did that little Matthew know? Because he's 15 is still very little, that he was gay. Was there representation around? Were there role models for you to look at and say, oh, that person is gay, so this is how I feel and this is who I am?
No, I mean the ridiculous lack of role models that we had. I mean, there was a terrible sitcom called Are You Being Served, which had a character called Mr. Humphreys, and he had kind of various kind of. It was very kind of Polari type thing. He was a coded gay, although they never talked about his sexuality. He never had a boyfriend or anything like that. He was just very camp, and occasionally there'd be kind of remarks kind of referring to a puff or something like that, i.e. a piece of furniture, and he would go, oh, Mrs. kind of thing. So I had that as, you know, kind of one image of what being gay was like. And the other thing was the kind of schoolyard kind of talk about all the perverts on the common. And that was, so these were the two things I thought gay men were like. And when I walked into that club, and it was full of hunky mustachioed men wearing check shirts and looking like Tom Selleck and Magnum. Oh, wow. I mean, it was so much better than I had dreamed of. I mean, it was just everything and more. And they were dancing to this music, which just somehow seemed to kind of get you right in the groin. And you were like, wow, this is the sexiest music I've ever heard. High energy music. I mean, first time I'd ever heard it, kind of thing. But, you know, at the time, it was just like, what is this amazing cocktail of wonder and joy and sensuality?
So what did you tell your parents at 15 before you left home?
Oh, well, my parents were away. I mean, you know,
Okay.
I lived a fairly I mean, yeah, I had two siblings. I'm not sure if actually the whole family were away. To be honest, I can't remember, but I know that my parents were away. So that was kind of how I knew I could get away with it. I think, back in the early 80s, I think children were much more independent than they are now. I think people are very, very careful now, and that's a good and a bad thing. I mean, I think that's a double-edged sword. I think being independent at quite an early age was actually kind of useful for me. But I know that there'll be people watching or listening to this podcast who are going, "Oh my God, this terrible thing happened to him when he was 15." Honestly, it didn't feel terrible to me. I know I do get the ick about it, but at the time, it felt magical.
Yeah. So that magic, how long did that continue for you?
Well, I mean, it continued for a week, and I'll tell you why. Is that I lost my gay virginity to an American, and he was just over on business. He went back the next couple of days, whatever. I didn't see him ever again, although he did write to me. But the following week, I sat down to watch the TV, and there was a documentary. It was a Horizon documentary called "Killer in the Village," which was the first documentary about HIV to be broadcast in the UK. So they were talking about AIDS. Actually, it wasn't HIV then; it was AIDS.
Yes.
And they said, this is something which is spreading amongst homosexual Americans. And I had just had sex with an American, and I thought, I'm completely screwed. I thought that was it. I thought that I was going to get AIDS. So that was kind of quite a lot to deal with at the age of 15. I am living with HIV. I think that's, for people who know me via social media or through my work, that's very well known. I didn't acquire HIV from that experience. I acquired HIV much later.
Okay. So, but did that frighten you to an extent that you wanted to seek out support? Were you able to seek support from your parents, for instance? I mean, a 15-year-old going through that kind of crisis, like that's traumatic. How did you deal with that?
Oh, I just dealt with it by myself. I mean, I didn't tell my parents. I told my mother that I was gay when I was 18. And the first thing she said to me when I said that I'm gay, she said, "Well, I expect you'll get AIDS and die then."
Whoa.
And I have to say that when I say that, people go, I get that response. People go, "Wow, what an awful thing." But that was what being gay meant to her. She worked as an occupational therapist. So almost all of the gay men she had encountered were clients of hers who had AIDS, and they all died. Every single one of them died. And so that's what being gay meant to her, and to a lot of people back then. So although it sounds incredibly harsh, it didn't come from a place of hate. It came from a place of fear.
Yeah. So I just want to understand, because in the 1980s, that's like we're talking about AIDS around, and you're coming out, you're having these wonderful experiences, mom saying that to you as well, that, oh, you're going to die, basically. So how does it feel for a young gay man at that point? And I'm sure your friends around you were also dying, as many of us know during that time this happened.
Well, I mean, when I was 15, 16, 17, I didn't have any gay friends. I only really got kind of a steady group of gay friends when I went to university, and I think that's very common, because suddenly, all these kids away from their parents together, and the gay ones maybe join the gay sock if they're brave enough. I joined the gay sock, and that's how I kind of really got to know kind of gay people. I throughout my time at university, I was at university until 1986 to 1989. And I think I only knew of one person who had AIDS at that point. We knew about it. I mean, obviously the Iceberg and Tombstone campaign, that very famous government AIDS campaign, came out around Christmas in my first year at university. But it wasn't, it was the numbers in the UK at that point were still fairly small. And for me, living in Leeds, where I was at university, there was one guy who I knew of.
Sure. Matthew, I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. Can you tell our listeners about that campaign that you just talked about, the Iceberg campaign?
So it was this, I mean, it was, as I say, it came out at the end of 1986. And it was it was the first AIDS campaign in the UK. It was funded by the government, and it was very well funded. Now, in the United States, they had been very slow off the mark. 25,000 American people had died of AIDS before the president, Ronald Reagan, even mentioned it in public. Whereas in the UK, because we were a couple of years behind the epidemic that had happened in the US, our government, under Margaret Thatcher, who also introduced Section 28, actually were much better off the mark. And they released this campaign, and it was, so the campaign kind of showed this iceberg, and the threat, the thing was, what you see on the surface is only a very small part of the danger, and had this tombstone crashing to the ground. And it was AIDS, don't die of ignorance. It was voiced by John Hurt, who had previously played Quentin Crisp in The Naked Civil Servant. And so he had some kind of association with kind of LGBTQ plus communities. But it was very doom-laden. And it was incredibly well funded because it was on the TV, it was on posters everywhere, and the leaflet was pushed through every door in England and Wales, probably Scotland as well. I think it wasn't necessarily released in Northern Ireland to the same extent. I mean, which is the kind of promotion, the kind of marketing which you can only dream of now. And I think it had a really huge impact. Lots of people who live with HIV kind of are quite anti the campaign because it was very stigmatizing. It talked about it as this terrible, monolithic health challenge, and people were frightened. It was meant to frighten people. It was meant to frighten people into certain behaviors whereby they were less likely to acquire HIV. But of course, the impact of that now, however many years later that is, well, good gosh, 40 years later, this year, is that people who live with HIV like me now, I still encounter people whose main knowledge they have of HIV is from those adverts. And it was such a blunt instrument that kind of really had this incredible impact, which people still can't shake. So I think a lot of people living with HIV are very down on it, but I'm grateful that the government actually did something about HIV at an early stage rather than like how they did in America. I'm grateful that there was a bit of information out there. I'm also grateful, fun fact, you had Lisa Power, I know, on your podcast before, but she was working at Switchboard at the time that this campaign came out. And on the leaflet, they had Lesbian and Gay Switchboard's number. This from the government, which introduced Section 28. They put Lesbian and Gay Switchboard's telephone number on a leaflet, which went to every house in England.
I didn't know this.
So Lesbian and Gay Switchboard got a lot of calls, and not all of them were about HIV and AIDS.
Oh, that's brilliant, actually. Yeah, that's brilliant. So how did Matthew turn into this activist that we know of now?
Well, I went to university. I was kind of with other LGBTQ plus people there. And then Section 28 happened. And it was the first new piece of homophobic legislation to be introduced in a century. And I felt personally attacked. I was being personally attacked along with the rest of my community. And I felt, does this push me back into the closet? No, it does not push me back into the closet. It makes me take an axe to that closet door and just be as loud and as visible as I possibly can be, because that's what you have to do when you're under an attack, which very specifically is about erasing you from the public view. And they wanted that isolated kid that I was to be alone. They wanted that kid not to be able to connect to other people, not to be able to see anyone who could say that they have a chance of a happy and healthy and long life as a queer person. And I wasn't going to be a part of that conspiracy of silence. So that's what flung me out of the closet, flung me into activism. And I mean, so it was that, but also there was AIDS. And my community was being attacked. It felt like my community was being attacked from two different directions. One, there was this disease where we were carrying by far the heaviest burden of disease in the UK at that time, as gay and bisexual men particularly. And then there was this homophobia, which was was being introduced by the government. And well, actually, no, the homophobia was widespread. The government took advantage of that and said, people are homophobic. If we become homophobic too, we will do better in the polls. And that's what it was about. I mean, that's the thing. I think people often lose sight of that. It was popular. That's why they did it. It wasn't necessarily because, I mean, sure, some people believed in it, but they also saw this is a way to get votes. And that is where I really see the connection between what happened then in the 1980s and what is happening with trans communities now. Is that politicians aren't fighting trans communities because they believe in it. They just go, this is an easy vote winner. This is we can divide people and we'll slip through. And whilst we're fighting about trans rights, we're not addressing the root causes of inequality.
Sure. So Matthew, I'm going to go back to the 1980s and early 1990s, because at that time there was no social media, right? Today, social media is the biggest tool that all of us use towards our activism. So how did you go all out and say, okay, they're hurting my community. This is about my community. I'm going to fight this. But what tools did you have to use at that time?
I mean, we had direct action. We had protests. I mean, I've got, not as many photos as I would have if we had cameras on our phones, or if we had mobile phones. We didn't have those even at that point. But you went to protest. You took part in direct action. I've got photos of me on AIDS protests. I've got photos of me on gay rights protests. There was a lot. The way the tabloid newspapers talked about gay people was really offensive back then. They would kind of routinely refer to us as woofters and pufters and pansies and things like that. And a friend of mine wrote to the Press Complaints Commission and said, this language, come on, you're stirring hatred. And the Press Complaints Commission responded and say, this is common parlance and therefore it's acceptable. So, well, what can you do if you go through the complaints process and the complaints process says, no, it's okay for them to refer to you as pufters and woofters and pansies. So what did we do? We got cans of pink paint and we went to Fleet Street, which was where the print media was mainly based back then. And we painted pink triangles all over all the buildings. And we got arrested for that, which was okay, because we kind of knew when we were doing it, it's like, this is a protest. We don't think we're within the boundaries of the law, but the law isn't serving us right now. And we need to do what we can to have some kind of impact. And of course, in the 80s, and when I was university, Section 28 was going through. And there was a march in Manchester, a Never Going Underground, it was called. Now, I'd been on Gay Pride. I went to my first Gay Pride in 1986. And back then, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 people, maybe, something like that. You know, it felt amazing. I mean, it's like I'd never seen so many queer people in my life. I mean, it was incredible. But that march in Manchester, just before Section 28 went through, 20,000 people. And at the time, I believe that was the largest ever kind of gay rights gathering in the world. I'm pretty sure that's correct. And what happened from that, though, was that the next Pride March, the next June Pride, 20,000 people. The one after that, 30,000 people. The one after that, 40,000 people. You know, it just snowballed. And this is something which really gives me hope, is that actually I think the gay rights movement ultimately really benefited from the enormous pressure we faced as a result of Section 28, as a result of AIDS, because it meant that we had to not just get angry, but get organized.
Yeah.
So it led to outrage, and it led to Stonewall. And I think outrage and Stonewall formed this pincer movement, whereby you had a group of angry activists disrupting things and making a lot of noise. And then you had Stonewall come along, and the government could say, well, I can't talk to those angry activists over there, but these people are wearing suits and they seem terribly nice, so maybe I'll talk to them. But I think it's the pincer movement that actually drove that change. And it does give me hope about the period we're living through now, is that I see how awful things are for trans people right now. And I go, but maybe, just maybe, through this, we will actually end up in a better place, because hopefully we will actually start to platform trans people and actually be able to listen to trans people. And hopefully it's long overdue, but trans people should be in the room when they're making legislation about trans lives. You know, I mean, this is the fundamental challenge we have. We have a bunch of cis people together discussing trans lives, and no trans representation in those rooms at that time at all.
It shocks me, Matthew. It shocks me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, I think what is heartening is the trans march that we had, the trans pride on the 25th of July, I think. Oh my God, I was there, and I know you were there as well. Because 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, there were hardly anybody. There's 5,000-6,000 people. Here, it's estimated there were over 150,000 people. I mean, look at that. We all came together.
It's exactly the same thing that we saw with you know, normal, but LGBTQ pride, you know, the wider community pride. That's what also changed in the 80s. In the 80s and early 90s, it just got bigger and bigger, and I'm seeing that with trans pride now, and it's wonderful. And I thought that trans pride the other week, I thought it was going to be angry, and there was anger there, righteous anger there, but actually it was just an incredibly joyful event. Or that's what I left it with. I just felt so lifted up by seeing so many trans people being able to express themselves freely, and by seeing so many allies out there saying, you know, we see you, we understand what's happening right now, and you know, you're going to have to go through us to get to our trans friends, because you know, we will stand with you. The atmosphere was astonishing.
It was for sure. I've had a few of my trans friends come back to me, whether through emails or on my social media, saying how wonderful they felt, because they felt that they were truly not alone, that they were with all of us. You know, basically, before someone said to me that I know that before they get to me, they'll have to get through to all of you first, and that's not going to happen. They're not going to get to me because I've got these huge army of you people, and you know, that felt so good to hear. Because they have an army of us behind them, you know, like I know that we will have them when we need them as well. So I agree with you that the communities are coming together again. And we've heard this at the roundtable that we had the other day, Older Queer Voices Roundtable 2 on Section 28. And all these people, Lisa Power, Michael Cashman, Peter Tatchell, they talked about the Manchester Pride. And they also said how we were all now coming back together, and we have to reorganize. We have to make sure that any frictions we have within our community, that's now set aside, and we rebuild our community. And that gives me a lot of hope as well. And I want to come back to you again, Matthew, on your own diagnosis, because I know that again pivoted your life into another direction, right? Your own diagnosis as an HIV person. So how did that feel for you? And did life change, or did you continue with who you were anyway?
No, it did change me quite dramatically. I was kind of working as an actor when I was diagnosed, or trying to work as an actor, and so I was diagnosed in 1998, and it's really important to acknowledge that when I was diagnosed, we had effective treatment, but effective treatment was still new. So it kind of the conference which said we can now treat HIV was in 1996, in June 1996, I think. And so it was kind of about 18 months after that I was diagnosed. And the doctor said to me, don't panic, we've got treatment now. You'll probably live about 20 years, which felt like a long time, because I had known so many people who hadn't had 20 years. So when I kind of got that, I was like, okay, you've got 20 years. That's a good amount of time. You can do something with that. And I didn't feel like being a struggling actor was what I wanted to do. I felt like I wanted to do something where I could feel more sure that I was having an impact and that I was using whatever resources I had for good. So I joined Gay Men Fighting AIDS as a member of staff, and kind of was involved. Well, first of all, I was involved with a group called the Positive Campaign Group, which was developing campaigns for people living with HIV, and that felt really important because everything else that was out there in the HIV space was talking to people who weren't living with HIV. So like the language that was being used was protect yourself. Well, what does that mean if I'm living with HIV? It's a bit late for me now.
Yeah.
And there was this kind of weird thing. It's like, look, I'm not saying that everyone with HIV will be diagnosed, but there's a significant bunch of people who are living with diagnosed HIV. Kind of, there'd be a really useful group to be carrying out that safer sex message, or receiving those safer sex messages. But there was almost this assumption that once you got your HIV diagnosis, that your sexuality would just be thrown away. It's like, oh, well, you've got HIV now, you're never going to have sex again. This was never true. And I hasten to add, people with HIV were always, often does have an impact on your sex life. I mean, it did have an impact on mine. But this idea that somehow you're now wearing some kind of magical chastity belt is just nonsense. And it was really important for me that the voices of people living with HIV were also represented, and the needs of people living with HIV were addressed. And that just wasn't happening within public health. It was like we just became a medical thing. We became a medical problem to be solved or to be treated. But nothing was there to actually kind of acknowledge that we still had hopes and dreams and ideals and sex drives and lust and, love.
And society telling and also society telling you through all these campaigns that there was shame attached to it, right? There was stigma attached to it. So how did you deal with those kind of things?
Well, I mean, so one of the campaigns which I worked on when I was there was called the Plus VE campaign. because we were told, I mean, when I was diagnosed, I was told, oh, don't tell people. And that was kind of a frequent thing. It's, people were told not to tell.
But who was telling you not to tell people?
The health advisor. You get a health advisor, and they're like, don't tell people. Yeah, this wasn't kind of coming from my peers. This was coming from the medical authorities. Don't tell people, because you won't be able to rein that knowledge back in again. Once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't put it back in. And then we contribute to that stigma, because we aren't there to illustrate what people living with HIV are actually like. So one of the campaigns I worked on was the Plus BE campaign, which was about saying that you don't have to tell people, but if you want to tell people, that's also okay. And you will encounter negative responses, but actually the more people who are open, who are willing to be open about their HIV status, the more we can dispel the ignorance and fear that leads to stigma. I have to say that within that, I wasn't open about my HIV status initially at first, and I'll tell you the reason why. Was I just couldn't bear the thought of my mother finding out.
Gosh, yeah.
And that kind of comes back to what she said to me when I came out as gay. I felt like I had just really let her down, like I was, that I was living all of her worst years. And my mother was, in many ways, I mean, she was a wonderful woman in many ways, but she was a difficult woman in some ways. And our relationship was quite complex. And I felt, while I was coping with my diagnosis, I felt that it wouldn't be useful to me for her to know, because I knew that if she knew, I would also have to look after her and look after her feelings about it. And I felt like I was too busy trying to look after my own feelings about it. And then what happened was a journalist called her up, a journalist who I'd spoken to called her up and told her that I had HIV, because they thought that would make a good story.
Oh my God.
And that was a lot. And it was enormously hurtful for my mother, and I really regret that now. And it made our relationship even more difficult for a period. But the really good thing about that was I no longer had a reason to have to keep that information to myself. It's like, well, my mother knows, my family knows now. And so therefore I was free to tell everyone, and I did. So I sat down and I wrote an article for a magazine and said, the best way that I personally can challenge stigma is by being open about my HIV status. And you press send, and it's that moment, like when you've jumped off a high diving board, and it's just like, you're scared as you approach the edge, and you jump, and it's like, well, there's nothing I can do now. I can't magic it back. But when I did that, I actually just felt an enormous sense of relief. I realized how heavy a burden it had been for me to carry this secret with me for all of those years. I just felt lighter and happier and better. And now, if I meet someone now, I will make sure that within the first 10 minutes of our conversation, they will know I'm HIV positive, not by kind of like, but just, I'll find some way to just casually insert it in the conversation. Ideally, not in the kind of a way where they feel they need to respond, just so they have that information. And if they want to ask me anything about it, of course, they're welcome to. But I just don't want it to be a secret, because I think the secrets that we carry harm us.
Yeah. I mean, just as you were saying all this, Matthew, I was actually going to say, oh my God, what a heavy burden for anyone to carry. You're not only carrying the burden of your own, health, you're carrying the burden of someone else's, that the whole response of your mom, because I've done that as well in my life. I've carried the burden of not telling my mom something. And that is a very, very heavy burden to carry. And although it came out in the wrong way, I mean, I think that's really shameful that a journalist had to call and tell your mom that. That's really shameful, but that still happens even in 2026, as we know. In fact, it's gotten worse now thanks to social media.
Yeah.
But what a burden it must have been for you to carry. And I'm glad that you're here with us and sharing that, because this is why we have our podcast, so that people can listen to stories like yours, Matthew, and understand what we've been through, what that generation has been through. And it doesn't mean this generation is not going through our own stuff. I think this generation is also going through significant amount of stuff. But I think that generation and our generation carried stuff which was not even ours to carry,
Mm.
you know? And I just, I mean, we're coming towards the end of our podcast. I just want to understand what has what has living as Matthew Hodson, what does it mean now in this present? Because you were 30 when I was trying to calculate your age when you were told that you had HIV, and that I thought, okay, around early 30s, 31, 32, and you were told 20 years. You were given 20 years. Now you've passed that 20 years. How does
Yeah.
it feel to look back, and do you fear what may happen now, or you live your life even in a more activist way?
Um, so I was 30 when I was diagnosed, and when I turned 50, it was strangely emotional, because I turned 50 and I'm like, yeah, I'm not dying anytime soon. I turned 50 almost 9 years ago. It's my birthday next week. So I'm 58 now. Soon I'll be in my 60th year. And yeah. I Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things that, like, on the one hand, it's like, how amazing that the treatment has improved to the extent that, I sailed past that 20-year marker, and, as I say, I feel like the road ahead is still long. Not only that, but I mean, when I was diagnosed, the side effects from treatment were really bad and were often visible. And when I started treatment, I mean, when I was diagnosed, we didn't start treatment straight away because the treatment was so toxic that they encouraged you not to. They like, wait until you have no other choice, then you start treatment. But dosing has got a lot better, and there's a much broader range of treatments available. So if you're on a treatment and it isn't working for you, they'll switch you to something else. But I do remember when I did start treatment, saying to the doctor, "Look, I'm really vain. So just if you've got two drugs and one of them is going to lead to kind of visible symptoms, and the other one, but is more effective for a long life, and the other one shorter life, but you'll make a prettier corpse, I'll go for the prettier corpse one, please." Because I felt like those were the options available to me at the time. But I think it is amazing that I just think how. Okay, so I think how incredible it is that we've come this far, that someone like me living with HIV actually now has the same life expectancy as someone who doesn't have HIV. I mean, that's astonishing. At the same time, when I say someone like me, I'm talking about someone with access to HIV treatment. And still, 1 in 4 people in the world don't have access to HIV treatment. And that number may actually even be increasing as a result of changes in international aid funding, specifically the US with PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which Donald Trump is tried to get rid of entirely. Now he's phasing it out. But it's not just the US. The UK has also reduced its contribution, and other countries around the world have also done the same. It's devastating to me that people are still dying of AIDS. It's just, we have effective treatment, and yet people are still dying of AIDS. And I think, it's so frustrating when you think about wealth inequality, and you think about what someone like Elon Musk could do with his money if he decided to use his power for good, because he could eliminate the threat of AIDS easily, with what for him would be like a day's income. And instead, we're scraping around, and there's charities, non-government organizations around the world who are really working incredibly hard to make sure that everyone has access to treatment, and those are being defunded. And partly they're being defunded just because the communities that carry the heaviest burden of HIV are marginalized communities. It's women, it's Black people, it's sex workers, it's drug users, it's trans people, and it's gay and bisexual men. And we see what's happening in lots of places around the world where they're saying, we'll fund stuff, but if it does anything to support trans people, if it actually recognizes the existence of trans people, we won't support it. Well, trans people, Black trans sex workers, I mean, if you're taking a very specific demographic, probably have the highest burden of HIV of any demographic group in the world. And we could reach those people, but you can't if you shut down the services which cater for them.
Gosh, it's shocking, isn't it? Like just when I hear all these things, it just reinforces the message that, gosh, we can do better. Elon Musk can do better. The world can do better. I don't know whether it was you on a panel or someone else I heard a few years ago talking about a conversation on this. And someone said to me on the panel, they said that there were women who had different life. They were just married to their husbands, never had sex with anyone else, but they were thrown out of their homes for no fault of theirs because they have HIV and they're HIV positive, and then they were thrown out and for nothing that they've done, and I thought that I can't remember the statistics, but those numbers were quite significantly high as well. And I was thinking, wow, what is the world coming to?
I'm incredibly privileged because I'm able to be open about my HIV status. I live in a country, I have a community, which enables me to do that and to do so without fear. And what I would hate would be for anyone to take my example and say, so why isn't everyone open about their HIV status? Because particularly women, but I mean men as well, but particularly women, run a great risk of intimate partner violence if they're open about their HIV status. There are horrific stories. So I really recognize the privileges that I enjoy, which make that easy for me. And I hope that I am helping those people who aren't able to be open about their HIV status in some way by being open. But I know that not everyone else is in the same position as I am and doesn't have that freedom that I enjoy.
Matthew, what do you do currently at this point? What are you involved with, or involved in, I should say?
Well, so I got really ill a couple of years ago, and at the time I was told that I was dying, which was kind of interesting again, and it wasn't particularly HIV related. So I had to kind of step back from what I was doing because I was working at AIDSmap. I was the executive director of AIDSmap, which is an organization which provides information about HIV and AIDS to audiences all around the world, which was such a fantastic job. And I'm so proud of the work I did there, and so proud of the team that I was part of, and so proud of all of the work that we delivered. But I was kind of dying at the time, and I recognized that I wasn't going to be able to carry on. So I stopped, and I do a bit of consultancy, but the funny thing is, I started acting again. The thing which I gave up when I was 30 and recently diagnosed with HIV. And it's weird. I feel odd about it because it feels somehow more selfish than the things I've been doing for the intervening years. But I'm loving it. I'm working a bit. I'd like to work more. I'd like to earn more money from it because money's tight. But I am doing something that I really enjoy doing. So that's kind of fun. I've shot 5 short films this year. None of them have come out yet, so
Okay.
I don't know how good they are yet, but I'm hopeful that some of them will be very good, and people will see them and enjoy them.
Oh, we look forward to them, Matthew, and you must let us know so we can share it on Older Queer Voices. Would love to know that. But I think life is a full circle anyway, isn't it? It seems to me that it started off somewhere and it's kind of almost coming back to where it started. So that's wonderful. And I also think that I've met you now a couple of times, and I've been your fan, like I said to you earlier. I've followed your work for years. And no, this is what you do, right? You don't stop. You're just being on a podcast and talking about your own story and your journey and talking about HIV and Section 28. That itself to me is activism that continues. This is legacy. This is what I call legacy. It stays far, far, far beyond you, right? So
Yeah.
my final question to you, go on, sorry. I'm not going to
I was
interrupt
just going to
you.
say, well, yeah, I don't think I could ever stop being an HIV activist. And the really corny
Yeah.
joke I make is it's in my blood.
Oh, it is corny. Hey, so my last question to you before we end this very, very fascinating and interesting conversation is about legacy. Do you consciously think that all of us should leave a legacy? Like consciously sit back and say, okay, let's leave a legacy so that future generations can gain from it, benefit from it? Or do you think that it just naturally happens that when people like us are activists and we do our work sincerely and with intentionality, legacy stays?
I I go and visit my parents in the cemetery. They're both dead now, and I find it really interesting that actually very, very few graves which have been there for longer than 10 years have any fresh flowers on them. You know, there is a limited amount of time that people are remembered. And you sometimes see these kind of great Victorian vaults, and you're thinking that person thought they were going to be remembered forever because they built this great mausoleum, and you know, they're forgotten. I'm really lucky that I've had people tell me that I've had a really positive impact on their lives. I've had people tell me that I had one guy who said that he'd been recently diagnosed and he was going to kill himself because he didn't think he could cope. And then he stumbled across something that I had done where I was talking about HIV, and he said, looking at you, hearing you, gave me hope and made me feel that it was worth carrying on. And like when something like that happens, you kind of go, well, I mean, yeah, how amazing. And I am really fortunate that I have quite often have people come to me and say things like that. And I think that's astonishing. I don't worry about whether any impact I've had will survive a generation beyond, but the fact that I've had a positive impact on some people is just like it's an amazing feeling, and I'm incredibly grateful that I've had that opportunity.
What a beautiful way to end this podcast. It's beautiful. I'm just like, okay, we're not, one of us can cry, not both of us. But yeah, not on my podcast. No, but it's beautiful, beautiful, Matthew. Beautiful that this is how you feel, because I've spoken with several people, as you know, on my podcast and over the last 6 years on several other podcasts. And typically people, a lot of us want to leave a legacy, to understand that it's actually quite humbling the way to look at it. Like you said about tombstones, like, excuse me, who's going to remember you? Who's going to put flowers on you after maybe the first 5 months? And two is that if one person, just one person came up to you and say that you made a difference to their lives, your story created change for them, I think that's the most powerful legacy we can, leave behind. So thank you. I've really, 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 from the bottom of my soul, really enjoyed my time with you today, Matthew. Thank you very much. Would you like to say one last thing before we close?
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, I mean, just thank you so much for having me on your show. Just okay. If I have to say one last thing, just everyone remember that when we're on effective treatment, there is no risk of sexual transmission. This is the piece of information about HIV, which just needs to be said at every opportunity, because not enough people know that. And it's hugely powerful in challenging the stigma and ignorance and fear that we face.
Can you repeat that again, just one last time, so people can listen to it again?
When we who live with HIV are on effective treatment, there is zero risk of sexual transmission of HIV. And isn't that wonderful?
That is wonderful, Matthew. Thank you so much. Your story reminds us that progress never happens by accident, really. It happens because people are willing to speak up, stand up, and refuse to be invisible. So thank you for being really, really visible today and sharing your story. Really, the word that comes to my mind, and I'm repeating it so beautifully. And with that, everyone, if you want to nominate yourself or someone on this podcast, you know where to reach us, theviewsroom@gmail.com. Share, continue talking to us, continue sharing our stories. And we look forward to listening to your own views on our program. And thank you very much. And see you next time. Bye from Older Queer Voices.